What do you think the strongest weapon is? The one made from the strongest metal. Don't you make them all from the same stuff? Well, yeah, but I maybe put extra effort into some of them. Like what? The fish greatsword. There's metal in that? Ladies, gentlemen, and monsters of all ages, I spent quite a bit of time recently pawing through data about Monster Hunter over the years on a hunch. A well-educated hunch, but a hunch nonetheless. One that I wanted confirmation on so that we can have a proper discussion about it. After going back through all the speedrun rankings I can find from every Monster Hunter game, as well as a bit of community insight wherever I could find it on forums online, I've gained a pretty clear picture of something that people always ask about. What is the strongest weapon in Monster Hunter? But this time, not just in one specific game, but in the series as a whole. And of course, this led to some interesting results, and also gave me some fun insights to talk about with you all today. Let's start by going through each generation one at a time really quickly so you have all the information that's going to be based off of. For the first generation, I mostly looked at base Monster Hunter 1, as there was much more info for this than for the G-Rank expansion. There weren't many individual quest speedruns available, so we instead looked at full game speedruns, and the top ones here were using the heavy bowgun. This is the main theory that I expected to confirm by looking at all of this. This concept of hunting monsters should simply be easier from a ranged position, or at least more effective. It means you should have to dodge less attacks simply due to distance. It has a lot more ability to prepare for varying types of fights with different ammo types, and on top of that, especially in the early games, bowguns didn't have any sort of combos, any special attacks. Every shot did the same thing each time that you fired it, and so you didn't have to build up to the damage. It was really consistent. It was just very, very easy to continually do. Then we move on to the second generation with Freedom Unite. We start to get a bit more data to have a look at here, and after looking it up, the general consensus was that the most difficult quest in the game was Twin Terrors, a G-Rank DLC quest that has you fight two Furious Rajang at the same time in a small arena. The top run for this quest was a user holding a bow, which, while not quite the same as a bowgun, is still a ranged weapon and gets some of the advantages that I was just talking about. For the sake of it, due to the relatively low sample size of early generations, I also looked at the fastest full game speedrun for Freedom Unite and found them to be using a heavy bowgun. As we move on to the third generation, things get a little bit muddy. There aren't as many runs in the English-speaking world, so the best that I could find was a full game run to Sedeus. There were a fair few entries there at least, but the fastest one was actually using a hammer, which goes a bit against my theory, but I think the reasoning is actually quite simple. Underwater combat weirdly did not favor ranged weapons. Hammer in particular was pretty good underwater just for the way that it interacted, and so it does make sense to me that in a full game speedrun that includes multiple underwater quests, Hammer would actually come out ahead. Then we move on to the fourth generation, and for you, we start to get much more notable stats. As far as a full game run, the Charge Blade seemed to be the weapon of choice. Simply high damage return for low upgrade investment made it particularly efficient for this type of run. But as far as actual runs, we have some actually lovely data analysis by Martin AW4, who took a bunch of the level 140 guild monster quests and worked out the average speedrun kill times for each and every weapon, at the top of which is actually Insect Glaive, with Greatsword not hugely behind. The main reasoning I can think of here for this one is mounting. Mounting wasn't balanced all that well upon its initial introduction in the 4th generation, and Insect Glaive having an aerial moveset let it mount way more than the other weapons, thus leading to more downtime for more punishing combos. On top of that, it was the first game Insect Glaive was in general, and so the balancing may not have hit quite right yet for that weapon. Greatsword being second is an important thing to note though, and we'll talk about why specifically a little bit later on. In Generations Ultimate, we have a similar analysis process, taking a lot of the harder quests in the game, and you'll find that 90% of the time, Valor Heavy Bowgun is at the absolute top of the list. There was just something special about this combo of Valor mode and Heavy Bowgun that just made it wipe the floor with the rest of the weapons on nearly every quest. Then as we move on to the 5th generation, our data gets more and more complete, a lot more entries, and so a lot more info to be drawn from.
Data.
For World and Iceborne, head and shoulders above the rest is Heavy Bowgun, both freestyle and TA rules, and a lot of what I said earlier about ranged weapons applies here for sure. Not only do bowguns get the ability to change their ammo type depending on the monster they are planning to fight, but they also have pretty consistent damage, and also the ability to fight from range gives you quite a few bonuses too. The fastest freestyle melee weapon is Greatsword, and the fastest TA rules melee weapon is Dual Blades. Then finally we have Rise and Sunbreak. This specific tier list is from Fox Invictus, taking data from over 4,000 4,000 speedruns as of this point, and we see that light bowgun is at the very top, doing about 41% more damage than the average weapon, which is genuinely nuts. Then just 1 point under it is heavy bowgun. A few points other than that is bow. Bow has been relatively close up on a lot of these, but it snuck back up to the top end in Sunbreak again, and I think this is once again due to the reintroduction of shot types, which bow didn't have in World, for example. Once again, letting bow prep more specifically for different monsters like the bowguns do, not to mention how well bow works with element due to its multi-shots and how strong element has been in Rise and Sunbreak. Then once again, we have the greatsword as the strongest melee weapon here. So now that we've gone over all the actual numbers, what does this tell us exactly other than bowgun be strong? Well, I think the first thing to recognize is that the concept of a ranged weapon in a hunting game just is strong. Think about the amount of times with a melee weapon that you've been flinched or knocked around ever so slightly just by the monster moving a couple of inches, not even doing an attack, maybe they're just turning. When this happens, you lose out on an entire attack, you lose out on damage, but if you were a ranged weapon, they wouldn't be close to you and so nothing would happen. Past this, there was also quite a big conversation to have about damage variance, because part of the reason why ranged weapons are so high on this list is because they have the highest potential rather than the highest average performance. In a perfect run, you can avoid being hit by the monster without having to stop firing because you can just movement dodge because of your distance, but that won't happen every run, not by any means. The result is that your strongest run will be better than the strongest run for a melee weapon, even if your average experience isn't that different at all. That said, as I was alluding to earlier on, the ability to switch to pierce ammo for a longer monster or spread for a smaller one even on its own is such a massive increase in potential strength, and speedruns conceptually run off of the idea of preparing as much as possible for a singular encounter, so of course they are running the best setups possible. In other words, take all this conversation with a little bit of a grain of salt. These are the strongest weapons according to the data that we have here, and while it does apply to certain aspects of the game, you can certainly see it reflected in average gameplay when you're just playing with other hunters, it isn't the be-all end-all of metrics to judge the power of a weapon on average. It is the metric to judge weapons on their potential. With that then, let's talk quickly about the greatsword, the one that came up the most as the melee weapon that did the best in generations where ranged weapons just won out. Why the greatsword then? Well, I think it's a concept that I've already mentioned, damage variance. Specifically what I mean is I think about the greatsword gameplay. It is a ton of massive, meaty attacks, really long drawn out combos that end with ridiculously strong hits at the end of them. All of that makes the greatsword very strong, potentially. However, because of the time it takes to do these attacks, it is also entirely possible that you miss them. An average player just will not hit every attack that they swing on a greatsword, it just won't happen. But in a speed run, especially one that you would actually post online, you're damn right that you'd make sure it's one where you hit an above average amount of your attacks. And because of greatsword's inherent high risk, high reward style of gameplay, in which you get high damage when you do hit, but it's hard to hit, speedruns will always show the high reward version. People won't post the ones where they mess up, they'll post the ones where they do incredibly well, and it's in that situation that greatsword thrives due to its massive numbers for each hit that connects. That said, this isn't to take anything away from the greatsword either. I'm not saying greatsword is bad and we're just cherry picking, I'm more saying that this is more of an indication of the potential of greatsword, the very high end, rather than the average gameplay of an average hunter, which makes sense really. With that then, let's ask the question, should ranged be better? Should ranged weapons have the advantage that they consistently do?
I want you to stay far away from me.
Well, I don't think it's quite as simple as a yes or no here so much as let's just talk about what makes this the case in the first place. First up, ranged weapons are harder to use than melee weapons on average. I'm not talking about input memory, I'm talking about aim more than anything. Yes, you have to aim a melee weapon, but aiming a hit from 2 feet away and you're just aiming the angle of a slice is a lot different than constantly following your aim of a small crosshair on the weakest part of a monster. It takes skill, it takes practice, and you have to be moving while you're aiming as well. Generally, those are two things that deserve rewards. This is part of the variation of bowgun as well. Someone who isn't great at aiming will never reach the heights of the potential that a bowgun has, and the same with bow. It also requires quite a bit more preparation to reach this height. Not only do you have to stock up on loads of ammo of various types, but you have to build different bowguns for different ammo types, use different builds for the different guns, use different gun mods for the different guns as well, and the playstyle is just different as well between these all things, same with the bow, especially now. The result of that is if you have prepared as much as physically possible with a ranged weapon, you will generally perform better than someone who has done the same with a melee weapon, simply because there are more avenues of preparation. Preparation in a hunting game is always rewarded. It is an important facet of the genre, and so it makes sense. I would never argue that ranged weapons should be rewarded less for preparation, so the only fix that I could potentially see here is doing the opposite. Find a way to give melee weapons more preparation. Maybe give them the concept of weapon mods like bowguns have, or have them rewarded proportionally for choosing the correct options for the correct monsters. Obviously, this would all get a little bit complicated, but it depends what you want. I think for the average player, the weapons are in a pretty good spot. I think while not perfectly balanced, they are close enough that unless you are a really top tier hunter, you'll get similar performance out of most of the weapons. And seeing as this is a PvE game, not a PvP game, things don't have to be balanced perfectly. It's fine the way that it is, and people enjoy it, so I don't really see an issue with it at all. There are ways to potentially even out the systems a little bit, like I said before, giving melee more preparation options to be rewarded for, but you could argue that would also overcomplicate the games and remove some of the fun as a result, so I don't know. I don't think that is a fix that everyone would like, so maybe it's just totally unnecessary. In any case, this was just a fun discussion I wanted to have. I wanted to dive in through some old speedrun data and find what I could and see if my theory was right, and, well, it is. Historically, and still in the present, the ranged weapons have always been dominant as far as dealing damage goes. This may not apply to the average player or the average run, but the very top end, the very highest potential has nearly always belonged to a ranged weapon in every generation, simply because of the way that the games are designed. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think there are a number of reasons that it actually makes sense, but it makes for an interesting conversation nonetheless, don't you think? Like if you like the video, subscribe and hit the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.